Well, thank you to all of those people that were mentioned. I mean, it's overwhelming, all the planning that has to be done to actually come here. Months of planning, and I really, really appreciate all the love and support from everybody, from Le Cap, from Circuit Gallery, from Contact, the people at Patterson, everybody, thank you for having me here. Okay, so where do I start? I'd like to show you a couple of images of things that I was looking at when I started photographing. Before I became a photographer, I was working in the leisure management area, so it had nothing to do with what I'm doing right now, except that I have to manage my time. That's about it. But when I started working in photography, I had the amazing opportunity to work in a photography center as the digitizer of their archive. So my first experience with photography was scanning images from way back in the 19th century to the end of the 20th century. And that really got me thinking about the place I was living in and how it had changed through decades. How the people have changed, how the streets have changed, how some activities are not done anymore. Where is that city that I'm looking at in these images every single day? I'm scanning 100 pictures every day of things that aren't there anymore. So that really buzzed in my head. And it's not like I went out and I'm like photographing immediately. It's just something that was sticking in my head. This image, just a small comment, this was done by George Eastman. He went to Monterey on a train trip, and he photographed Monterey on that trip. I was also interested in how the topography of the city was changing through the urban development, how things were before we had the highways, we had the sky rises. What was this city like? And I mean, it was very miraculous that every day I was looking more and more at these images. And the second job I did for this photography center was travel the state. Nuevo León is the state. Monterey is the capital of Nuevo León. 51 cities or municipalities. So I traveled for almost 3 months, knocking on people's doors, asking them to show me photographs of their family albums. So for 3 months, I had the opportunity to see photographs of people that had never been seen before and that were personal. So that also got me thinking about the stories they were telling me about where they used to go on vacation, what they did on the weekends, and how things had changed from those stories and those photographs and the reality of those municipalities. Another thing that was really interesting in scanning these images was the idea of progress, especially in the state of Nuevo León. That's a state that's always had that, I don't know, savviness of industry and business, and how the photographers, the contract photographers, were projecting that progress through their photography. And this is a great example of this, and this is an image by Eugenio Espino. He's a photographer from Puebla, but he eventually made house in Monterey. He's actually a camera inventor, and how do you say that? Yeah, a camera inventor. So he did his own cameras, and he was a super good photographer. And what you see there is actually a 1960s maquette of, or AutoCAD of something that an architect contracted him to do. So he would photograph the model of the building, and then he individually photographed the cars, the clouds, and then did a collage to show what this place would look like if it were placed in the city, or this image also. so the perspective is off, but imagine this, there's no Photoshop, everything's done with negatives in the dark, so he's dodging and burning and making things make sense when you can't see, when you're printing, if you're printed black and white, you're not really seeing the effect. You have to, do a lot of things to make this happen. So this effort of him to project the progress of a city seemed very interesting, and it was something that also was underpinning in my work, and I think I somewhat explore in the work I'm doing now. Again, this is a scene of one of the wealthy parts of Monterey, and there's the nanny taking out the kid on the tricycle? Tricycle. I'm sorry. And I'm sorry I did not mention this. I'm not an English speaker, so bear with me. I know how to pronounce the words, but my mind is thinking in Spanish, so I try to keep up as much as I can. How the city's activities, I mentioned a little bit about that. This is the Obispado. This is what used to be the seminar of Monterey, and this is right downtown, so it has nothing to do with that. Or this image of, it's in 1909. This is a photograph done by Frida Kahlo's father, Guillermo Kahlo, and he was an amazing photographer, and he was contracted by Porfirio Diaz, the dictator, to him and Eugenio Espino Barros to do a book about the progress of Mexico in 1910. And I love this image because it speaks about how an image is what you see, but then there's something underneath that if you scratch it a little bit, there's always another meaning. And you can't really see it here, but you kind of notice everybody is standing outside the train. So imagine the power of a dictator to say, stop the train in the middle of that bridge and get everybody off that train so we can take a picture of what this train is for Mexico. So there is that. It's not just about beauty and about the power to get the train from one end to the other. It's about also the representation of power through the image. Or this image about the boom of the extraction of oil in Mexico, which is an image of something that looks like, I don't know, the US or in Kuwait or another part, but not Mexico. And I was really intrigued how these images were just forgotten in this archive and were never shown in any high school or any junior high. There's a story about who we are in images, but it was being discarded or just put away in an archive. And lastly, the other images that really impacted me was the idea of the family. And what was the family composition in the 20th century in Mexico? So these images are done by a photographer in Monterey called Alberto Flores Varela. And this is what a family kind of looked like in 1936 in Monterey, Mexico. So you have seven kids. So these images, and this was a whole archive that I had the chance to scan. They were doing a book about him, so we scanned all his studio portraits that he did of all these families and people for Monterey. And this last image is one of my favorite images. This is by Rodrigo Moya, and this is Mexico City. And this is also something that was very, it seemed crazy that this is a city, this is how a place is constructed. It's basically, it feels like there's no space. And again, it's the magic of photography that's shifting. Of course, the point of view makes it look completely different than if you stand there. This is Tlatelolco in Mexico City. And now to talk a little bit more about what we came here to talk, which is Latin American suburbanism, and specifically the case of Mexico. When I was starting to get a sense that I wanted to photograph this idea of the city, I came across a book published by the Universidad Autónoma de México, and they they were claiming that 65% of the growth of the Mexican cities were illegal or irregular. So imagine that, I mean, thousands and millions of people were getting a house, but they were living in slums. It wasn't a regular space. It wasn't something that the government could provide services to them because it was an irregular space. And this was happening all over the place, in Mexico City, in Monterrey, in Guadalajara, in Aguascalientes, in León. It was just an epidemic of the irregular living space. And in 2000, 5 years after this study was published, we changed political parties in Mexico. We went from the PRI to the PAN. And the PAN saw the opportunity to make a business of social housing. And it really opened the opportunity to make more houses available to the low-income part of Mexico. And the Infonavit, that's one of the major providers of housing in Mexico, social housing. And I'm going to talk about 3 of the things that changed in this program that completely changed the landscape of Mexico. The change of the Article 43 bis in the Constitution of the Infonavit that allowed to use the funds that this program was saving from the workers. So 5% of your income goes to the Infonavit every month, so you can then get a house. So with that income, they went to the banks and said, hey, we don't have money, but we'll put up the savings of all the workers, and we'll put that as guarantee for you to give the workers a loan so they can buy a house. So it was a great system, and loans started to be handed out. That year was, before that year, the average loans were between 30 and 50,000 nationwide. That year it went up more than 100,000 loans. And then the other program that Infonavit put in place was La Casa Infonavit 2000. And what they did with that was subcontract the building of the houses. So instead of them having to wait to get the federal funding to build the houses and then distribute between the workers, what they did was make a subasta, how would you say that in English?
Auction.
An auction of the opportunity to sell houses to the or build houses for the Infonavit. So for the first time, you had these developers saying, okay, we'll build 150,000 houses for so much money. If you guarantee that you are going to sell them, we're not going to have to sell them. And the Infonavit said yes. So suddenly they were building, again, from 30,000 to 150,000 houses per year. And then the other thing that gave them money was they started to invest the money that the workers' money that was saved in the Bolsa de Valores?
Yeah.
In the stock market.
Stock market, yes. Sorry. So suddenly they had this extra money, and so they started building more houses, giving more loans, because this political party knew about business, knew strategies to make that money work instead of just having it saved up to build a small amount of houses. Now the thing was, well, you need people to buy those houses. So a major propaganda system started in all Mexico to convince people that the best way to progress as a Mexican is to own a house. You don't rent, you buy. This is the way to move up in your lifestyle. So this was in all the newspapers all the time. Casa tu sueño, which is hunt your dream. El mejor lugar para vivir, the best place to live. Excelente ubicación, excellent locations. Tu casa hecha realidad, your house come true. So, and this is just a few. There are so many more sleazy and tacky commercials that were done to make people want to buy a house. And the thing is that before that, people were scared to buy a house because you had to go to the bank. And if you don't pay the bank takes your house. But suddenly it's, the government is telling you, you don't have to go to the bank. We'll give you the money. We'll be your intermediary between the bank and the house developer. So it was the perfect system, and of course they had to just offer the houses. You just need to pay 100 pesos down payment and you can get a house. That's less than $10 and you can get a house. So imagine everybody started buying houses. It was mayhem. People buying. People who never ever thought that they were gonna buy. But if we think about this study that was done before, this was the perfect way to regulate. They were going to build the slums anyway, because, and you'll see the houses a little bit more ahead. They're really, really small houses, but at least they're going to make money out of the houses and the need to build the house. And the thing is that somebody was making money already. The ejidatarios, the people who owned land as a community in the peripheries of the city, were selling land, but they never give a property certificate. So you would pay for your land and never get something in return. So as long as there was no conflict between the other members of the community, you can have the land. But suddenly the community leader shifts and he wants to resell your plot, your little lot of land. So you were kicked out and they resold that piece of land. So suddenly the government say, hey, there's a business right there. Let's regulate this thing and let's give them a property certificate and we'll get the money for that instead of it being irregular. So all these, what I started to document here was the people going to the Infonavit and some of the housing developers involved with the Infonavit. This is a typical scene in some of the parks in Monterey where the private developers would set up shop and have their little computers there, and you as a worker, you go with them, you give them their name, they have access to the Infonavit system, and they can tell you if you're eligible for the loan to the government loan. It's a point system, so once you're awarded a certain amount of points, depending on your age and the time you've worked at your job and your income, you can get the loan. So they set up shop, they're there the whole day, and as soon as they pack those trucks that are right there on the right, they take you to the house that's about an hour or 45 minutes away from there. So I wanted to see something that I thought would never be photographed. People going to ask for loans, people asking for an opportunity to have a house. I thought that was something that it was like a loophole in the history or the story of home ownership in Mexico. This is something that if it's not documented, it's just, we would never know what it looks like, what this system looked like. And the system became so, I mean, there was so much demand for these houses that they had to automate, thank you, the system. So you went looking for a personal contact and they would say, no, call a number, which and then that connected you to a call center somewhere else in Mexico. And the bureaucrats that work in that office, you know, they're talking on the phone, but not to the people who are there to, you know, get answers. And so I wanted to do that relationship between waiting, the people waiting to know if they're eligible to get their house and move out of their parents and in-laws, and the director who was very happy to let me photograph in this institution because I told her, this is a changing time in Mexico and you are responsible for it. And she's like, welcome. She was a really nice lady, but I mean, she didn't know what I was trying to say with this documentation, but it was interesting anyway. So people, I mean, it gets really dramatic. I didn't photograph the people who were crying. Some people cry because they were told, next week you're gonna have enough points, you're gonna get your house, so they're moving all this stuff, and then suddenly, no, you don't have your house, you don't have your loan. So they have to wait. And or the bureaucrats, like this lady was having a hard time because she didn't get what she expected. Some of the things that happen sometimes is that it's corrupt, the system. So basically, you get your points, you get your loan, and you're assigned where you're gonna live. So if you lived in the northern part of the metro area, suddenly you were gonna be living on the southern part of the metro area, and you had no voice, unless you had 20,000 pesos to pay off the bureaucrat so he can give you where you want. So not a lot of people had those extra 20,000 pesos to actually get where they want to live. So it's a stressing moment for a lot of these people, and not for others. Then what happened around 2004 and 5 is that there was no more space. There was too many houses in the immediacy of the city, and there was no more space. And of course, a law had already passed in the 90s about the selling of community land, but it was really, really enforced starting in 2004. So what the developers did was get the community, the ejidatarios together, the community leaders, and convince them that they needed to sell their land. And they did that so well, they bought out thousands and thousands of acres all over Mexico, because they thought this is a never-ending story. People are always going to want a house, so let's buy as much as we can and just have them as reserves. They were community reserves, and now they're private property reserves for speculators. And that happened in 2004, 2005, and I'll tell you a little bit more about these 5 developers that were buying into all these community lands. So this was the house that was advertised. This was the beautiful house that you were going to get if you gave 5% of your income every month. And the reality was that this was the house they were going to get. These are the cheapest and smallest houses that were built in the system. And they're 5 meters by 10 meters, so 50 square meters. And that law changed in 2009 when they said it was too small. So they passed a new law where it's 90 or 93 meters, the minimum size of a social house to be sold through the Infonavit. But as always, there's loopholes, and what the developers did was build condominiums. 10 by 10, and build 2 houses in the condominium. So they continue to sell 5 by 10 houses, but in the condominium, registered as a condominium. So the thing is that the smaller the house, the more people could buy, because it was the cheapest. And one of these houses, the price was $20,000, so it's 243,000 pesos, more or less. So that's the cheapest, that's the lowest price of these houses at that time. And what I wanted to do when I started photographing these houses was almost work for the Infonavit and photograph the houses just like if I was doing a brochure. This is how people want to see their house. Everything's beautiful, there's no electric cables, there's no graffiti, there's no trash. Everything is almost pristine in a sense. And at the beginning it was very, what I did, it was such a boom that every week you had a map of all the new housing developments that were going to be finished and that you could go and shop to see if you wanted to live there. So I grabbed those maps and I would go, I maybe documented between 40 and 50 of these developments. And then some strange things started to happen, like this is in Apolaca, which is in the northwest, and then this is Escobedo on the northeast. And they're basically the same houses, just different cities. And that's something that boggled me, because it's almost an erasure of a history of a place. What's going to be, and it really affected me, or it really stuck in my head, because I had just finished scanning people's lives from 90 years ago, and every single picture there's an individuality to the house, to the space they play, and then suddenly what's going to happen in another 50 years when somebody scans the pictures of these different people, it's going to be like they all lived in the same house or the same, you know, neighborhood. There's not going to be a sense of place. And that was something that was in my head while I was documenting all of these places. Again, these are some of the smaller ones. And then sometimes you don't understand the disregard of humanity in the construction of some of these houses. Like, there's no windows, there's a little socket there for the electricity. Eventually there's going to be electrical poles and lines coming in to the front of the house instead of maybe on the back to make it a little bit more visibly nice. And anyways, the next part of the project, what I wanted to do was look at it at a larger scale, step back a little bit and try to see how those houses talked with the landscape. And that's when I started photographing from afar. And it just felt differently. These houses suddenly appeared almost like art installations, like somebody commissioned somebody to do boxes on a mountain. And it just seemed unreal. It just seemed completely unreal when you see these places. And of course, these are the model houses. They build a road just to get to these, so you can get a feel if you want the red, the blue, the yellow, or the green. So a lot of options. Or here where you have the white or blue. And some of these houses, like these are already a little bit inhabited. You can see because there's bars on the windows. And then you have those black dots that you see on the top. The houses were being built so quickly that it didn't take there wasn't any time to put in water, electricity, phones. I mean, it was just build them and get out, let's build some more, and let's build some more. So the developers that build the fastest put these water tanks, and then the municipality would go and fill up the tanks every 2 or 3 days so they can have running water in their house. So the abuses started almost in 2006 and 2007. Things started to shift. At this moment, I wasn't interviewing a lot of the people. I was mainly trying to stay away from the security guards and not get kicked out of these places. But once I started photographing the people, and we'll see some of those images, there was major discontent about living in these suburbs. And Monterey is a semi-deserted area. There's not a lot of water. And when I was finishing this first part of the project, I had the opportunity to engage the work with peers and teachers, and there was something that was missing about the project, and it was, why am I just documenting what is visible to everybody? Why not push it a little bit further and think of some of the unintended consequences of this suburbanization and try to make those things visible and dialogue with the fact that those houses are being built and are going to continue being built. So the first part, the first thing that I did after asking me those questions was photograph the water supply. What was being done to get water to all these new developments when the pipes came? You see there's the pipe. And it was the damming of rivers and streams around the metropolitan area. So what I did was, in a sense, document this unintended consequence of urban development, the desiccating rivers and streams all over the city and around the city that were just popping up all over the place because we needed to concentrate the water to get the water to the metro area that had already been developed and to the new housing developments. You got goats using the river, and this is a water pipe, and people were using it to get to the development that's actually behind, on the other side, and they were falling and hurting themselves, so the municipality paved it, put concrete on top of the pipe so they can, so they wouldn't fall. But they wouldn't put a handrail, just the floor. Again, a bridge crossing one of the rivers. And I started, methodically, is that how you say that? Yeah. Okay. Started documenting the outskirts, the rivers and streams on the outside, and then started to walk the riverbeds. And I got sick many times. There's dead everything you want, rats, horses, birds. I mean, it's just a big mess, a lot of garbage. And I wanted to get the feeling of the flow of the river to the city, and eventually get to where the city is and downtown, and see how downtown is reacting to this suburbanization of the metro area. And this is right downtown in Monterey. This is what Monterey used to look like in 2007 or 8. It doesn't look like that anymore. We had a hurricane come by, Alex, and he just destroyed everything that you see in the center. None of that is there right now. And once I was downtown, I started to see this. Houses being torn down in downtown because it suddenly became cheaper to live in the outskirts of the city. And people who were moving outside couldn't keep up with the house inside, so they had people trying to illegally get into the house, so they start tearing them down and just leaving the lots. And these sudden urban holes were everywhere. And I thought it was really interesting to think of how the life of the city. There has to be destruction for there to be construction. So it was a closing of a circle of how a city lives. Some people, like in New York, at some point they burned down the buildings in order to, make it easier to tear them down and not have to pay somebody to tear it down. And when I was downtown, there was another thing that really caught my eye, and was some of the parts that were really protected in the sense of how the design of the city was being done. And this part of the metro area is where all the fancy shops are, where there's people with maybe a little bit more commitment to deciding if what's gonna be put in their neighborhood. And of course you get the fancy stores, you get the Starbucks, maybe, I don't know if that's a good comment here, but a Starbucks was something, wow, at that point. You guys have it in every corner, so I've heard and seen. But to have a Starbucks, it's like, oh my God, everything's, has to be nice around it. The lawn, look, they have lawn, they have parks, everything's clean and planned out. Even the cell towers have to be pretty because, there's laws that are being enforced. And that's something that really struck me as different and really important to put in the project, because here you have people who have the power, the power of money to say, hey, we're paying taxes, we want this, we don't want that, and you have to come to us if you want to make a change to the city. And in these new suburbs, it was the perfect mechanism to shut them up. You have people coming from all over the place who don't know each other, who are worried that they're not going to be broken into their small house because there's no security in the new suburbs, there's no electricity, so there's no community being built. So they're just dropped somewhere, and it doesn't matter if you don't put a park, if you don't put a school, because they can't talk to each other. They're going to work, they're stressed, they just want to come home, have a beer, and watch the Tigres Monterrey football game. So it was there's a paper on this, and it's a theory, but it's very close to reality. And this is a landscape of what that area of the city looks like. There's no patterns. Everybody builds wherever they have the money to build, and I wanted to have this in the project to give that contrast between the power to decide how you want your city and the power of people telling you where you're going to live and how you're going to live. By 2008 or 9, I was almost done with all of these images, and a program started called Mexican Housing Day. New York, London, and the last one was Hong Kong. And the developers had the incredible idea to go public and start selling that if you buy our bonds, we're going to give you profit because people are buying unending houses in Mexico. And they made a lot of money, but through people's dreams of owning a house. And I'll come back to this with some notes on what happened, the eventual fall of this program. The houses never stayed clean. The graffiti came, the garbage came, the mess came. And I went back and photographed that 4 years after I had photographed the houses for the first time. I went back, and this is what I found. The first thing that comes in is the beer stores. You can see the Carta Blanca, the Corona. People reusing materials. Will Smith helping them not get burnt when they're doing their laundry. The explosión demográfica, somebody help me? Okay. The increase of population, according to a 2013 census, was that 80% of the babies being born were in suburbia, in these new developments, in these small houses. This is where the new Mexico is being built, in nowhere land, where there's no sense of place. And here are the people who are, having the kids there. And they're traveling, the system is not there yet. There's barely any transportation system for them, and if there is, they have to walk still 20, 30 minutes to get to their house. I love this picture because they saw me photographing these suburbs so long that they gave me a street. And I was so excited. I was like, who put that there? But no, I'm sure it happens everywhere in the world that the pretentiousness of these developers, and every single street name is a name of a city in Spain. So there's Madrid, there's Barcelona, and there's Cartagena, Spain. But anyways, I like that. The families, like these guys, this guy, he was gathering up wood with his kids to do the food because neither natural gas gets to them, nor the gas LP, I don't know how you call that in English. Propane gas gets, the service gets to them. So they're doing their food with wood they find around the development. A family that isn't really a family, and I really like this picture because of that, because that guy isn't married to her, and that baby isn't her baby, and that girl isn't part of that family. It was just it was just a barbecue, and it was just coincidence that those guys were together. So photography lies, and that's something that I love. And it helps tell a story, which is what I'm really passionate about, telling this story about these places. And you have the neighbors who keep up their trees that were given by the developers, and you have the ones that don't keep up with their trees and let them die. Or this girl that was coming home from a rave in Monterey. This is 8 in the morning. She's super drunk. These pictures were done with an 8x10, with a 4x5 camera, so it takes a while to focus, and the subject can't move, so she's like wobbling. I'm like, and I told my wife, go on, hold her, and I'm gonna focus. I focus, and then it's okay. We're ready. Put in the plate. 1, 2, 3, jump, and I took the picture. My wife jumped out of the picture, not her. And then I really like the idea of her Louis Vuitton bag. Her pirate Louis Vuitton bag, and that makes a perfect connection with the idea of the other places we saw of the San Pedro area of Monterrey, where you have all these pretentious places where people that live in these suburbs want to be like the other ones in the real, rich suburbs. Mafias with the services it happens all the time. The developers get in contact with the service providers, in this case the telephone company, and wants or pays them off. I don't know the amounts, but it tells them, here's such amount of money, don't put telephone lines in a year. And what the developers do, put in the public phone, so they win money for that year for the service of the phone. So they're finding ways to make more money apart from selling the houses to these people. These were early 2010, and that was the beginning of a big drug war in Monterrey and the metro area. So insecurity was very, very strong. Violence, death. It started to become a mess, and I'll come back to that. So this guy is building a garage to put in front of his house. He's a welder, and this is a Sunday. He's putting bars on the windows for people. This is a couple outside one of the biggest malls in the metro area in Juarez. And I love her boots, the Puma. The birthday parties, this is what it looks like. A party, and this is a really interesting image because you have the playhouse that's almost as big as the real house, and then the little sign of what was coming and the idea of car culture. There's a law enforced in border cities and where you can import cars that are 10 or more years older and not pay one of the taxes for importation. So we're buying all the old cars from Texas and using them to transport ourselves from the suburbs to the city. This is Maria, and she sells corn. This is, I think his name was Sergio, and he was really proud of his loser VW. That's the name of the group he gets together with. Again, space is very little, so people hang their clothes in the front. The Bocho, the VW, is a very classic car in these suburbs. So this is something that started to appear more and more, and in a way, at some point I didn't mention this, but I also became very passionate about the idea of the history of how photography has documented suburbia in other parts of the world, in the US, in Europe. And suddenly these cars were taken out of these old pictures from the 60s and 70s and suddenly inserted into contemporary Mexico, and it's like they had their second life cycle in a second suburbia. And it's a very eerie sensation. And of course, Walmart has to come with the new developments. We get Electra, FAMSA, El Pollo Loco, Quick Préstamo Express, which is quick loans. And then the last picture of this part of the project really sums up the idea of how the dream was falling apart. People didn't have a house, and suddenly they have a house, but it's too far away. We can't live this far away from where we work. So instead of living there, they go back to their in-laws and they start renting these houses for a Burger Alex, or Diaper Land, or for some farmacias similares, pharmacy. So suddenly, that dream isn't there. It fell apart. It wasn't this projection of the government to supply housing to all these people wasn't working because they weren't doing the rest of the job. For about 7 or 8 years that I was doing the project, 30% of construction in Mexico was infrastructure, 70% was housing. So that does not make any sense. You can't build so much houses and not have the infrastructure to help those houses. By 2011, 22% of all Mexicans lived in a house financed by the Infonavit. it is also the first time this year that more than 500,000 housing loans are assigned through the same institution. So the Infonavit started in 1972, and their first 10 years, they would do between, like I said before, between 30 and 50,000 houses. And almost 30 years ahead, they're doing 500,000 houses per year. So it was a truly successful program, but it brought chaos with it. These are some images of the drug war that started to occur in these suburbs. And why it happened in the suburbs is because they grew so fast that funding for more police took long to come. So suddenly a small city of 30,000 people had 150,000 people living in it with the same 100 police. So it was the perfect place for the drug dealers to set up shop. So many people were killed in these suburbs. This was it was a campaign of terror, because for activists to go to the suburbs, it became very dangerous. So people would not go and help the people who lived there, so nothing could be done because you were scared to go help the people that live in these suburbs. And the suburbs became the clandestine, fosas clandestinas, how would you say that?
Clandestine.
Graves. So it became the perfect place for the drug dealers to bury the people they were killing and not have a mess. Eventually, it came out. Juarez, the one that I was photographing, and the one where the people that I showed you, this was a mass grave of around 50 people that were found. And that was one of many in Juarez that were found. This musical group, Cholo Colombianos, I can't remember the name, 20 guys kidnapped in one of the suburbs, all killed, thrown into a well in the suburb. Or this casino where the owner wouldn't pay for operation to the drug dealers. So the drug dealers went in, spread gasoline, and lit it with people inside, and 52 civilians were killed. So it was a big mess, very big mess. And that was because it wasn't planned. It was about profit. And I'll come back to that. So anyways, car culture was something that was in my head. I couldn't let go. What's that car culture? How are we going to translate that to the Latin American experience? Because we as Latin Americans, we always put the flavor of what we are, and that be risking our lives, illegality, all that is kind of always permeating around the things we do. Not everybody. But this is one of the ways that people in these new suburbs were finding a solution to the lack of transportation. And what it was is, hey, let's get together, let's pitch in the gas money, and let's go to work. 3 in the front cabin and 3 in the back. So suddenly, instead of paying 25 pesos for the bus fare back and forward, you're only paying 15 pesos for a whole week, or 20 pesos for a whole week. And what I did with this was, first off, going to the suburbs and looking to what suburbs people were doing this, and then finding the route they were taking to go to work. And I found a perfect spot in one of the main highways that connects the northern suburbs that I had photographed before, going to the rich part of the city that I had also photographed. So these were the workers who were making the pretty part of the city be pretty, but they were invisible. And that was something that I also wanted to address with this body of work, which is, we don't want to see the people who are working, we just want the results. At least that's something that I feel is very, very regio, very much from the people from Monterrey. And of course, this is illegal. they crash and they're dead. And this is right in the middle of the drug war. And I was honestly scared to be photographing this because I'm on a highway, on a bridge. There's police passing by. There's always police stopping and waiting 5-10 minutes and looking to see if I start running or something. It was a troubled time. And another thing that was really comforting for me and that I really felt good about is showing another story about people who are not getting into the business of selling drugs or killing people, even though they have to spoon with their buddy. It's okay to spoon. So they're going to work, they're earning their money, they're paying their loans, and they're making it happen. And then, since I went so often to the same place at the same time, these things start to happen where you have the same truck, different months sometimes, the same people, and how they shift inside the truck. And that created, in the art sense, or thinking of it as something more artsy, the idea of constructing these scenes. They're not constructed. These guys are going 80, 90 kilometers per hour in a highway, and I'm jumping from lane to lane to catch them. Well, when you see them so static, and what possibility could there be to capture the same truck, you know? And I love how that opens up, that there's that dilemma between, is this real or is this, you know, fake, is this set up? Sometimes you're sleeping, and sometimes you're reading the newspaper. And another thing that I really loved about this work was that I never photographed the insides of the houses, of the small houses. And suddenly I'm photographing what they do inside those houses. They sleep, they read the newspaper, they chat with their friends, you know, they're listening to music on their cell phones. So I'm having access to their private lives in a public setting. And it brought a closure to that idea of the inside and outside of where these people live. Then I photographed this guy. Like the photographs from the Infonavit, I was really interested in knowing who are the people who are deciding what is regulated and what gets built in the city. Specifically, this project is talking about the laws that are put in place so that new highways are being built to connect the outside with the inside of the city. So suddenly, the people like me that live downtown are getting affected and having massive bridges built in front of your house because the highway needs to go faster to connect the outside with the inside. And these are the guys who are building those houses. Building these infrastructures. And these are the meetings where they say, let's make a sustainable Nuevo León, a plan for sustainable Nuevo León 2012, 2015. This was a reunion for that. So I started to go to these places and see what they're talking about, what's behind these people, what are they thinking, who are these people that are either messing up people's lives or, you know, benefiting them, and that's what they think. So I wanted to document that, another part that's invisible to everybody. We don't see who decides. We don't see the meetings where the people decide what's going to be built in the city. And this is what they're building. These underpasses or overpasses where they aren't supposed to be. So suddenly businesses are closing down because they're building this new infrastructure. They build them in residential areas, like this massive bridge in front of those houses that basically were shut down, the ones over there, those businesses, because there's no parking space, there's no way somebody can get there, especially when they're building the bridge. And then I wanted to see what it feels to have that massive structure in front of your house. So this is a continuing project. I'm going into people's houses and asking them, hey, can I photograph this infrastructure from inside your house? And of course, the ones who are critical let me in. The ones that are not critical or didn't even pay attention to what happened, they don't. But you have you have a new landscape, a landscape of infrastructure, and suddenly it's a whole different thing for these people. And things get torn down to build the infrastructure. And then the last part, to finish, I've gone back to photograph the houses that are not being sold. They got greedy, the developers. The program worked. They would do an auction and ask, we need 100,000 houses. They would build 150,000 houses with the same amount of money that they would build the 100. And they did sell the 100 because they were already commissioned, but the other 50,000 were never sold. So you have these massive lots of empty houses in the middle of nowhere. The last census was about 2 million houses that are abandoned from this program. And what they're doing now is selling them out in groups. So if you are an investor, you can buy the house at less than half the price and then speculate and try to sell it. Finish the painting, finish everything, and then try to resell it. So they're getting rid of something that's that they created. And I'm going to read this, and it talks about the developers and what happened with them. The housing boom contributed to a 294% rise in Mexico's IPC stock index in the 5 years through April 2007, when the Mexico Habitat Index, a gauge of home builder stocks, hit a record. Foreign investors were lured into the sector by profit margins at the three big builders that climbed as high as 22%. Homex, what is one of the big builders, stock quadrupled in price from its 2004 initial public offering through the shares peak in May 2008. That briefly made the family stake of Homex chairman Eustaquio de Nicolás worth more than $1 billion. Homex shares have lost 96% of their value from the end of 2008 through December 2013. In 2013 alone, the industry's collapse wiped out $1.6 billion in the combined market value of the three biggest developers, Desarrolladora Homex Corporation, Geo, and Urbi Desarrollos Urbanos. Geo and Urbi shares have been suspended from the Mexican Stock Exchange. They started reporting that when people gave the 100 peso down payment as a total sale, so that the investors would think that there was a lot of sales when there wasn't, so they got kicked out. All three builders have defaulted on their dollar-denominated bonds, many of them bought by US investment firms. Total losses in stocks and the face value of dollar bonds added up to about 3.95 billion as of December 4th, 2013. Because the bond purchases were private over-the-counter transactions, it isn't known how much was lost by US and European investors. In that housing day thing that I told you before, this is where all this was being done. And they were selling gold, practically. The president, Felipe Calderón, was saying this is the best time to invest in Mexico. People were putting money, and it all collapsed. It all collapsed, especially when the new president came in, Enrique Peña Nieto, that didn't support the program because it wasn't a pre-program, it was a banned program. So they let them go bust. And these are some of the images of some of these developments that are just there, standing with nobody living in them.